The second scripture reading for this morning comes to us from the 25th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew, starting with the 31st verse. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" The king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick, and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. May the Spirit of God continue to bless us through Scripture. May it guide the meditations of our hearts in the words of my lips. I just want to be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. I'll pray the Lord my soul keep. I just want to be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. I don't want to be a goat, nope. I don't want to be a goat, nope, because it's a goat. Ew. I just want to be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. More camp songs. More camp songs. This Matthew story that we have been about, and we've jumped a little bit here because the cyclical calendar of the church doesn't always match up with our regular calendar of things, and so we are here in a chapter in a place that is leading right up to the Passion. And in a couple weeks, we will find ourselves backtracking to bringing Jesus into Jerusalem. How will we get back into the past, you say? This church is a DeLorean. All we have to do is get it up to 88 miles an hour. But for now, we are here. And here is where we are going to make our living today. And this living is in a place where there are three parables grouped together. It is the last three parables that will be given before Jesus enters into the upper room and enters into his period of arrest, and before Jesus enters into the tomb. These last three parables. We heard two of them. The bridesmaids, and here this vision of the ring. And these last three parables are predicated on a question that the disciples asked. It's a question that other religious leaders asked earlier in the gospel. They want to know, Jesus, when are you coming back? Give us a sign. Now, anytime I ever read in the gospel someone say, give me a sign, I think of that comedian who would go, here's your sign. Yeah. Here's your sign. The disciples want to know, what is the sign of you coming back? And so Jesus starts with these parables that teach about not being worried when the person is coming back. The lesson of the bridesmaids and the talents that we didn't hear about today is not about knowing when the person is coming. It's not a quick look busy, the boss is coming kind of thing. It's about being prepared to the point of being ready, doing the things that we're supposed to be doing. Because when the bridegroom came for the bridesmaids, the call went out. So it wasn't really necessary to keep an eye on the time, but to make sure that we are ready, that we have done the things that we are supposed to be doing. And that's this last parable for today. But this last parable offers something else. It's a bit of a transition because Jesus isn't talking about in those days. Now he's talking about on the day, in the moment, when it happens. When the realm of God breaks its fullness into the world and becomes complete, when all of this is said and done, whenever it may be, this is what it's going to be like. Again, it's a parable cast alongside. And the language that Jesus uses is language that, we've captured onto, and we have some sense of what is going on here because we've been sort of commanded to do the sorts of things that Jesus asks about. But what we're not hearing is what Jesus was saying to his disciples and what Matthew was saying to the church that he was serving. Because the church that Matthew was connected with and the disciples that Jesus had around him were a different bunch of people in a different situation from us. The followers of Christ in Matthew's day were not meeting in large, specific halls. They did not have the benefit of the secular calendar giving them high holy days as time off. They did not even always have the benefit of protection from the state, be it tax or otherwise. No, Matthew's community of faith as it is gathered there is a community that is worried enough because Jerusalem has just been burned to the ground. The temple has been destroyed. And while there is some excitement because Jesus predicted these sorts of things would come to pass, there is also sufficient anxiety within the followers of Christ in Matthew's community of faith because the separation is coming. That painful moment when the followers of Christ and the synagogues will go different directions, when families will be separated based off of this belief sort of thing. Church splits are painful. Family splits are painful. And this is the direction that folks are going in. This is Matthew's community. They're dealing with this sort of pain and suffering at this point in time. And so what they hear when Jesus says, when it all comes down to it, the nations will be called together. The nations, by the way, are the ethnos. It's everybody else. Everybody. That same vision that Isaiah has when God gathers the nations. And so when Jesus says the nations will be gathered, he's actually not talking about the followers of Christ at this point. He's talking about everybody else is going to be gathered in. And they will be separated easily, because God is God, based on how they have treated the little ones, the least of these. In Matthew's gospel, the little ones, the least of these, are the followers of Christ. Woe be unto you if you put a hurdle in the midst of the least of these, the little ones, right? And so we watch out for those sorts of things. So Matthew's community, what they are hearing as a people who are not benefiting from being supported by broader society, who are not benefiting from state sponsorship or even state protection, as a group of people who are not benefiting from years, generations of being culturally ingrained in a society, what they are hearing in this is they are hearing a note of hope. There will be people who take care of you in the nations. They might not know God, they might not know Jesus, but they will take care of you, and they won't even realize it. And when it's all said and done, God will sort things out. That's what Matthew's community is receiving from this. Now, I would dare say that for the vast majority of us growing up in this particular society, we can't really count ourselves as being part of Matthew's community in the same way. I certainly cannot. I have always benefited from some sort of protection from the state. My faith has never been challenged by the state, oppressed by the state, or anything else. I haven't had to worry about persecutions. The closest thing I came to a persecution is people picking on me for my long hair. And you notice it didn't stop me. I still have long hair. Long, beautiful hair. I missed my calling. I won't quit my day job. So Matthew's community is hearing this thing a little bit differently, but we have 2,000 years of history and tradition, and the weight and the gifts of this particular society we live in that are going to be a lens that we perceive this text through. And so we should not be hearing necessarily all the time this assurance that there will be those out there who don't know God who will take care of us. There will be, because God is good. But we should be hearing the note that we have probably heard our entire lives as this sermon is preached. There are expectations of us. We no longer find ourselves as followers of Christ in the position of the Messian church. An underground movement, a small house church movement, a movement that does not have great effect upon society. We find ourselves in a different sort of position. We find ourselves in a position where society has the hallmarks of Christianity impressed upon it. Now, we might not believe that we are as powerful as we used to be in society, but most of us still get Good Friday, Easter Monday off. And so we hear what is most often heard in the church today, that note, that call, that prophetic call to care for those who are receiving of the preferential option. What the prophets pointed out, the poor, the widow, the orphan, all of those who have been shunted aside by society, those who have been abandoned or dehumanized by society over the years. I especially, because of who I am and where I live and how I grew up, hear that call ringing in my ears because I cannot count myself among any of the groups that have been shunted aside. And so the note that rings out for me here in this Matthew text is that call to clothe, to feed, to offer drink, to visit. I think that's the drive ultimately for the church, at least here in the Americas. Certainly here in North America, in the United States, in this little corner of the Commonwealth. That is the push, that call that we find ourselves under. And we might find ourselves looking around going, well, how do we know? How do we know that we are doing what it is that we are supposed to do? Well, part of it is laid out. I mean, are we feeding? Are we clothing? Are we visiting? Are we doing those sorts of things that are commanded of us. But there is another way of figuring it out. God, Jesus in the gospel answered the question, what is the greatest commandment? Love God and then love neighbor as self. And St. Teresa of Avila said, the surest sign that we are doing this, I think, that we should really be loving our neighbor. The surest sign that we are keeping these two commandments is, I think, we should really be loving our neighbor. For we cannot be sure if we are loving God. When did I feed you, O God? When did I clothe you, O God? I never saw you, O God. She says, we cannot be sure if we are loving God, although we may have good reasons to believe we are. But we can know quite well if we are loving our neighbor. We can know quite well if we are loving our neighbor. Jesus' ministry has been one that is identified with the neighbor, with the other, with humanity. And explaining and embodying God's desire for us. In these last teachings that Jesus gives the disciples, he is telling them, don't try to figure out when. Do your job. We've been called, we've been gifted, we've been empowered, we've been blessed beyond measure in our own special ways, and as a community and as a church in this nation and as a church universal, to be the realm of God. And while we might not in this particular setting connect with that promise that the Thean churchgoers connected with, we certainly can connect with the call to be church today, to feed, to clothe, to shelter, to visit. And because we can connect with that call, because we are faithful in doing it, we will be faithful doing it in the future. Thanks be to God. Amen.